The human colony ship Wanderer drifted through the darkness of space, its engines humming a steady rhythm that had become as familiar as breathing to the crew. After 6 months of travel, they had finally reached Scorvia Prime, a volcanic world that glowed red and orange against the black canvas of the cosmos. The planet looked angry from orbit, with rivers of lava cutting bright scars across its surface, but the initial scans had revealed something valuable beneath all that fire and fury. Mineral deposits unlike anything humanity had encountered before lay waiting in the cooler regions near the poles. Dr. Emma Blake stood in the observation deck, her nose nearly pressed against the reinforced glass as she watched the planet grow larger. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life, and this mission represented everything she had worked toward for the past decade. At 32 years old, Emma had already published 7 papers on theoretical alien ecosystems, but theory was nothing compared to the real thing. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her gray eyes sparkled with excitement that no amount of scientific professionalism could hide. Standing beside her was Jake Morrison, the security officer assigned to protect the science team during their ground operations. Jake was built like a wall, tall and broad-shouldered, with short blonde hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He had served in the Colonial Defense Forces for 8 years before joining the Wanderer crew, and he took his job seriously. Maybe too seriously, Emma sometimes thought, but she appreciated his dedication even when it bordered on paranoia. The research outpost took 3 weeks to establish. It was a small facility, just 6 connected modules arranged in a circle, with life support systems that recycled their air and water. 27 people called it home, at least for the next 18 months. The outpost sat on a plateau near the northern polar region, far enough from active volcanic zones to be safe, but close enough to access the mineral deposits that had brought them here. Around them, the landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way, with black rock formations twisted into strange shapes by ancient lava flows and thin wisps of sulfurous steam rising from cracks in the ground. Emma wasted no time beginning her surveys. Every morning, she would suit up in her environmental gear and head out with Jake following close behind, his rifle always at the ready. The atmosphere of Scorvia Prime was breathable but uncomfortable, hot and thick with minerals that left a metallic taste in your mouth. They explored caves and canyons, taking samples of rock and soil, searching for any sign that life had gained a foothold on this hostile world. On their 4th expedition, they found the cave system. It was hidden behind a collapsed lava tube, accessible only through a narrow gap that Jake had to squeeze through sideways. Inside, the temperature dropped by 20 degrees, and the walls glittered with crystalline formations that neither of them could identify. Emma's scanner went wild, detecting complex organic compounds that should not exist on a planet with no visible plant life. That was when they found the eggs. 3 of them, each about the size of a basketball, arranged in a careful triangle on a flat section of cave floor. The shells were translucent, revealing shadows of movement within, and they pulsed with a faint internal light. Emma knelt beside them, her hand hovering over the nearest egg. It was warm, much warmer than the surrounding air, and when she placed her palm against the shell, she could feel a vibration, like a heartbeat. Jake shifted nervously behind her, his rifle scanning the shadows. Something about this place made him uneasy. The eggs looked deliberately placed, not randomly scattered. That suggested intelligence, purpose. But there were no adult creatures anywhere, no nests or food stores, nothing to indicate that anyone would be returning. The cave was silent except for their breathing and the quiet hum that came from the eggs themselves. Emma made her decision quickly. Protocol said they should observe and document but not interfere with alien life. But protocol also said that abandoned specimens, especially those that might provide valuable data, could be brought back for study. The eggs appeared abandoned. Without an adult to care for them, whatever was inside would likely die. She convinced herself that she was performing a rescue, not a theft. Jake did not argue, though his expression made it clear he had doubts. They carefully loaded the 3 eggs into padded cases and carried them back to the outpost. Emma set up her personal quarters as a makeshift nursery. She installed heat lamps and humidity controls, creating an environment as close as possible to the cave conditions. The eggs responded well, their internal light growing brighter over the next few days. She spent hours watching them, taking notes, running scans, trying to guess what kind of creature would emerge. The data suggested something reptilian, but the size and the complexity of the organisms inside indicated intelligence far beyond anything she had expected to find on Scorvia Prime. The first egg cracked on a Tuesday night. Emma had fallen asleep in her chair, exhausted from a long day of fieldwork. She woke to the sound of breaking crystal, a delicate tinkling that made her heart race. The shell split in a neat line around the middle, and a small head pushed through, covered in crimson scales that gleamed like polished rubies. Golden eyes, far too intelligent for a newborn, locked onto Emma's face. The creature chirped, a sound that was almost musical, and pulled itself free of the egg. It was a dragon. There was no other word for it. Small, no bigger than a house cat, with wings folded against its sides and a tail that whipped back and forth with excitement. The scales looked delicate, but Emma suspected they would harden with age. The hatchling stumbled on wobbly legs, chirping again, and Emma found herself reaching out without thinking. The dragon climbed onto her hand, its claws pricking her skin gently, and nestled against her chest. Within minutes, it was asleep, purring like a tiny engine. The other 2 eggs hatched within hours of each other. Emma barely had time to process what was happening before she had 3 dragon hatchlings crawling all over her. They seemed to recognize her as their mother, following her around the small room and crying if she stepped out of their sight. Emma knew she should report this to Commander Paul Henderson immediately, but something made her hesitate. She wanted just a little more time to observe them, to understand them before the military minds took over and turned this discovery into a strategic asset. That night, Emma lay in her bunk with all 3 hatchlings curled up on her chest. Their warmth seeped through her thin shirt, comfortable despite the heat. They purred in unison, a sound that vibrated through her ribcage and made her feel strangely peaceful. She stroked their scales gently, marveling at how something so alien could feel so natural. The hatchlings shifted in their sleep, their wings twitching with dreams Emma could not imagine. Elsewhere in the outpost, Lisa Grant sat at her communication station, watching her screens with growing concern. She was the communications officer, responsible for monitoring all incoming and outgoing signals. For the past hour, her long-range sensors had been picking up something unusual. Ships, dozens of them, moving through space at speeds that should not be possible. They were still far away, days out at least, but they were heading directly toward Scorvia Prime. Lisa ran the data through her computer 3 times, hoping for an error, but the numbers stayed the same. The fleet was massive and it was coming fast. She zoomed in as much as her sensors would allow, trying to get a clear image. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The ships were not like anything in the human database. They were organic in appearance, covered in what looked like scales, with massive wings folded against their hulls. They moved through space with a grace that human vessels could never match, swimming through the void like fish through water. Lisa felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She reached for her communicator to alert Commander Henderson, but paused. Emma had mentioned finding something in the caves. Something with scales. Something that looked reptilian. The connection hit her like a physical blow. Those ships were not ships at all. They were living creatures. Dragons. Giant dragons capable of surviving in the vacuum of space, and they were coming here for a reason. Lisa pulled up the file on Emma's cave expedition, reading through the notes quickly. 3 eggs, found in what appeared to be an abandoned nest. She closed her eyes and swore quietly. They were not abandoned. They were hidden. And now the parents were coming home to find their children missing. In her quarters, Emma slept peacefully, unaware of the approaching storm. The 3 hatchlings shifted on her chest, their dreams filled with images of fire and flight, of a vast pack moving through the stars together. They chirped softly in their sleep, a sound of contentment and safety. They had found their mother, and in their simple understanding of the world, that meant everything would be all right. They did not know that their real mother was coming, and that she was bringing an army with her. They did not know that the peaceful human who held them so gently was about to become the focal point of a confrontation that could end in blood and fire. For now, they simply slept, warm and safe, completely at peace in the arms of the stranger who had saved their lives. Commander Paul Henderson stood in the command center, his coffee growing cold in his hand as he stared at the tactical display. The approaching fleet had grown from distant dots to distinct shapes over the past 12 hours, and what he saw defied everything he thought he knew about space travel. The creatures were enormous, some the size of frigates, others as large as cruisers. They moved in perfect formation, their wings folding and extending in coordinated patterns that somehow propelled them through the void. Henderson was a military man with 20 years of experience, and he had never seen anything like this. Lisa Grant had briefed him an hour ago, her voice shaking as she explained her theory about the eggs. Henderson had immediately called Emma to his office, and the xenobiologist had arrived looking confused and defensive, still wearing her pajamas. When he asked about the cave expedition, her face had gone pale. She had admitted everything, stammering through an explanation about abandoned specimens and scientific protocol. Henderson had not yelled, which somehow made it worse. He had simply told her to stay in her quarters with the hatchlings and wait for further instructions. Now he had to figure out how to prevent a massacre. The outpost had defensive capabilities, but they were designed to handle pirates or hostile wildlife, not an armada of spacefaring dragons. He had 27 people under his command, most of them scientists who had never fired a weapon in anger. Against them came a force that numbered in the hundreds, creatures that could apparently survive without oxygen and travel faster than human ships. The math was not in his favor. Jake Morrison entered the command center, his rifle slung over his shoulder and his face set in grim lines. He had been conducting a security sweep when the alert went out. Now he stood before Henderson's desk, ready for orders. The commander appreciated Jake's composure. While others panicked, Jake simply prepared. It was a quality that came from years of combat experience, the ability to stay calm when death came calling. Henderson explained the situation quickly and clearly. The dragons were coming for their young. Emma had taken them from a nest, albeit unknowingly. Now the parents wanted them back, and they had brought reinforcements. Jake listened without interrupting, his blue eyes focused on the tactical display. When Henderson finished, Jake asked the only question that mattered. Could they return the hatchlings before the fleet arrived? Henderson shook his head. The dragons would reach orbit in less than 3 hours. Even if they loaded the hatchlings onto a shuttle immediately, they would not make it halfway to the fleet before being intercepted. Then we prepare to defend ourselves, Jake said simply. Henderson nodded and began issuing orders. The outpost went into lockdown mode, blast doors sealing between modules and emergency power systems coming online. The 27 personnel were divided into 3 groups. The first group, mostly scientists, would shelter in the central module with the reinforced walls. The second group, anyone with combat training, would man defensive positions. The third group, just 3 people including Emma, would stay with the hatchlings and wait to see if diplomacy was possible. It was a thin hope, but it was all they had. Emma sat on her bed, the 3 hatchlings playing at her feet. They had grown noticeably in just the few days since hatching, already twice their original size. Their scales had hardened and their wings were stronger, capable of brief gliding flights across the room. They seemed to sense the tension in the outpost, staying close to Emma and chirping nervously whenever she moved. Emma tried to project calm, but her hands shook as she stroked their heads. She had done this. Her curiosity and her arrogance had brought death to their doorstep. The dragons arrived exactly on schedule. Lisa tracked them on her sensors as they descended through the atmosphere, their bodies glowing with heat from the friction. They moved in waves, the larger dragons in front and smaller ones following behind. The formation suggested military discipline, organized and precise. Lisa counted over 200 individual creatures, and her sensors indicated there were probably more beyond scanning range. The fleet settled into orbit around Scorvia Prime, a ring of living ships that completely surrounded the planet. The largest dragon began its descent. Lisa watched it separate from the fleet, its massive body cutting through the clouds like a knife. It was easily 3 times the size of any other dragon in the pack, with scales that looked almost black from a distance but reflected deep crimson when the light hit them right. Ancient scars marked its hide, evidence of countless battles survived. This was a matriarch, a leader who had earned her position through strength and cunning. Lisa felt her stomach drop as she realized this dragon was coming straight for the outpost. Matriarch Vex Thar felt the rage burning in her chest as she approached the human settlement. She had lived for 3 centuries, long enough to see her kind driven to the edges of civilized space by younger, more aggressive species. The Red Dragon Pack had fled system after system, always searching for a safe place to raise their young away from those who would hunt them for sport or harvest their scales for armor. Scorvia Prime had seemed perfect, a harsh world that few others wanted, with caves deep enough to hide their precious eggs. She had hidden her 3 youngest hatchlings in the northern caves while the pack dealt with a territorial dispute with a rival dragon clan. The dispute had taken longer than expected, Nearly 2 weeks of posturing and small skirmishes before the rivals finally backed down. When Vexthar returned to retrieve her hatchlings, she found the nest empty and the scent of aliens throughout the cave. Humans. The species that spread like a plague across the galaxy, taking whatever they wanted without asking permission. Her rage had been immediate and absolute. She had called the entire pack together and sworn they would hunt down every human in the system until her children were returned. The tracking had been easy. Humans left trails wherever they went, exhaust signatures and radio waves that screamed their location. The Red Dragon Pack had followed the scent across 3 star systems, gathering their warriors as they went. Now Vexthar looked down at the small outpost and felt her fury reach new heights. They had taken her children and hidden them inside a metal box, as if that would keep her out. She would tear the structure apart piece by piece if necessary. She would burn every human she found until her hatchlings were safe in her claws again. Vexthar landed outside the outpost with enough force to crack the ground beneath her claws. She was nearly 50 meters long from nose to tail, with wings that could blot out the sun when fully extended. Her golden eyes, each the size of a human head, focused on the largest building. She could smell her hatchlings inside, their scent mixed with the alien stink of humans. Fire built in her throat, white-hot and ready to be unleashed. Behind her, more dragons landed, forming a circle around the outpost. Warriors all, each one loyal to Vexthar and ready to die for their pack. Commander Henderson watched through the observation windows, his face grim. The matriarch was even larger than he had feared, a living engine of destruction that made their defensive weapons look like toys. He had stationed Jake and 4 other armed personnel at strategic positions, but Henderson knew they would last maybe 30 seconds if the dragons decided to attack. He reached for the communications panel, intending to attempt some kind of negotiation, but before he could speak, the matriarch moved. Vexthar did not wait for permission. She drove one massive claw through the outer wall of the outpost, tearing metal like paper. Alarms shrieked and atmosphere began venting into the thin Scorvian air. She pulled back and struck again, widening the gap, following the scent of her children deeper into the complex. Humans scattered before her, screaming and running for cover. She ignored them. They were not her target. Only her hatchlings mattered. Jake opened fire, his rifle spitting rounds at the massive dragon. The bullets struck her scales and bounced off harmlessly, leaving no more than scratches. Vexthar turned her head toward him, her eyes narrowing. A lesser creature would have fled, but this human stood his ground, continuing to fire even though it was clearly useless. Vexthar felt a brief moment of respect before she swept her tail around and sent Jake flying into a wall. He crumpled but did not die, which was more mercy than she had planned to give. Emma heard the destruction coming closer. The walls shook with each impact and the air filled with dust and smoke. The hatchlings cried out in alarm, their young voices high and frightened. Emma gathered them close, holding all 3 against her chest despite their increased size. She whispered to them in a soothing voice, telling them everything would be all right even though she did not believe it herself. The door to her quarters exploded inward, and Emma looked up to see the massive head of the matriarch dragon forcing its way through the opening. Golden eyes locked onto her and she saw death reflected in their depths. Emma closed her eyes and held the hatchlings tighter, waiting for the fire that would end her life. But the fire did not come. Instead, there was only silence and the sound of 3 small dragons chirping in recognition and joy. Vexthar froze with her claw extended and fire building in her throat. The scene before her made no sense according to everything she knew about predators and prey. The human female sat calmly on a sleeping platform, her body relaxed despite the massive dragon head that filled the doorway. The 3 hatchlings were pressed against her chest, not cowering in fear but chirping happily at the sight of their mother. They recognized Vexthar's scent and called to her with joy, yet they made no move to leave the human's embrace. Instead, they burrowed deeper into the strange creature's arms, seeking comfort from both their mother's presence and the human's warmth. Emma forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm even though every instinct screamed at her to run. She could feel the heat radiating from the dragon's mouth, could see the intelligence burning in those golden eyes. This was not a mindless beast. This was a mother looking at someone who had taken her children. Emma spoke softly, keeping her voice steady. I found them in a cave. The nest looked empty. I thought they were abandoned. I kept them warm. I kept them safe. I did not know you would return for them. I am sorry. I am so very sorry. The dragon did not respond, did not move. Emma continued speaking, her words tumbling out in a rush. She described finding the eggs, the careful temperature controls she had set up, the hours she had spent monitoring their development. She explained how the hatchlings had imprinted on her when they emerged, how they had refused to leave her side. Emma reached for her datapad with trembling hands and pulled up the cave location, showing Vexthar the coordinates and the scan data that had suggested an abandoned nest. She showed the dragon everything, holding nothing back, hoping that somehow this massive creature could understand human language or at least the intent behind the words. Vexthar listened, her rage slowly cooling as she processed what she was hearing. The human's voice carried genuine remorse and fear, but also something else. Affection. The creature spoke about her hatchlings with the same protective tone that Vexthar herself would use. The dragon shifted, pulling her head back slightly to get a better view. The hatchlings were healthy, perhaps even healthier than they should be at this age. Their scales gleamed and their eyes were bright. They showed no signs of mistreatment or fear. In fact, they seemed remarkably content, purring as the humans stroked their heads with gentle fingers. Other dragons began arriving, drawn by the sounds of destruction. They crowded into the corridor behind Vexthar, ready to strike at her command. The warriors snarled when they saw the human holding the hatchlings, fire building in their throats. They had come for blood, for vengeance against the species that had stolen their future. But Vexthar raised one claw, a gesture that meant wait. The warriors obeyed, though confusion showed in their movements. Why did the matriarch hesitate? The human was helpless, the hatchlings were within reach. They should attack now and reclaim what was theirs. Lisa Grant arrived with a translation device, a small piece of technology that the outpost used for first contact situations. Her hands shook as she activated it and placed it on the floor between Emma and the dragon. The device hummed to life, its sensors analyzing the sounds that Vexthar made and converting them into something approximating human language. The translation was rough and mechanical, but it worked. Vexthar spoke for the first time, her voice deep and resonant even through the electronic filter. You took them. My children. You stole them from their nest. Emma met the dragon's eyes, refusing to look away despite her terror. I did not steal them. I saved them. The nest appeared empty. There was no scent of an adult, no sign that anyone would return. By human standards, they were abandoned. Our protocols say we can study abandoned specimens, especially if they might not survive without intervention. I brought them here to keep them alive. If I had known you would return, I would have left them where they were. I swear to you, I meant no harm. The translation device worked both ways, turning Emma's words into sounds that Vexthar could understand. The matriarch tilted her head, considering. The concept was strange to her. Dragon young were never truly abandoned. Even when hidden for safety, there was always a plan to return. But she had to admit that the cave had been chosen specifically because it showed no dragon scent, to keep it hidden from the rival clan. From an alien perspective, it might indeed appear empty and forgotten. The human's actions, while misguided, had not been malicious. She had been trying to preserve life, not destroy it. Vexthar called to her hatchlings, a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the floor. The three young dragons chirped in response but did not move from Emma's arms. The matriarch tried again, more insistent this time. Come. You are safe now. Come to your mother. But the hatchlings only burrowed deeper against the human, their small claws gripping her shirt. They wanted both, the safety of their mother's presence and the comfort of the stranger who had cared for them since birth. Emma felt the awkwardness of the situation settling over her like a weight. These were not her children, but they had bonded with her. Forcing them to choose would be cruel to everyone involved. Emma spoke carefully, choosing her words with precision. They know you are their mother. They are happy to see you. But they also know me. I was the first thing they saw when they hatched. I fed them and kept them warm. They have imprinted on me according to standard xenobiological bonding patterns. If you take them now, suddenly and without transition, it could traumatize them. They are too young to understand what is happening. They will think they are being separated from one parent to be with another, and they will grieve. The concept of trauma was familiar to Vexthar. Dragon hatchlings who experienced severe stress in their early days often grew into troubled adults, aggressive or fearful in ways that damaged the pack. The matriarch had seen it happen before, young ones torn too quickly from nursemaids or exposed to violence before they were ready. She had lost hatchlings to such damage, watching them fail to thrive despite every advantage. If this human spoke truth, then taking her children by force might harm them more than leaving them in enemy hands. But Vex-Thar could not simply abandon her young again. The maternal instinct that had driven her across systems burned too strongly for that. "What do you propose?" Vex-Thar asked, her voice cold but no longer filled with rage. Emma thought quickly, her scientific mind working through the problem. "A gradual transition. I will stay with them and help them adjust to you over several days. We will slowly increase the time they spend with you and decrease the time with me. We can use scent markers and feeding schedules to help them understand that you are their primary caregiver. Within a week, maybe 2, they should be comfortable enough with you that I can step away completely. It is how we handle similar situations with Earth animals. I believe it will work here as well." Vex-Thar considered the proposal. It meant trusting a human, a species she had learned to despise. It meant allowing this alien female continued access to her children when every instinct said to eliminate the threat immediately. But it also meant prioritizing her hatchlings' well-being over her own pride. That was what a good mother did. She made the hard choices for the sake of her young. The matriarch pulled her head back from the doorway, giving Emma and the hatchlings more space. "Very well. We will try your method. But know this, human. If you harm my children in any way, if you attempt to flee with them or hide them from me, I will hunt you across the galaxy. I will burn every world you love until there is nothing left but ash. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight for words. She understood perfectly. Vex-Thar turned and addressed the other dragons in their own language, a series of roars and growls that the translation device could not fully parse. The warriors backed away, reluctant but obedient. They had come for battle and found a strange peace instead. It felt wrong, unfinished. But their matriarch had spoken, and they would follow her judgment even when they did not understand it. Commander Henderson arrived at the scene, stepping carefully around the debris and the massive dragon claws that had torn through his outpost. He took in the situation with the practiced eye of a career officer. The immediate crisis had passed, but they were far from safe. The outpost was damaged, the dragons still surrounded them, and they were now dependent on the goodwill of creatures who had every reason to destroy them. He approached the translation device and spoke formally. "I am Commander Paul Henderson, leader of this outpost. On behalf of humanity, I apologize for the misunderstanding. We did not know the eggs were yours. We meant no offense. If there is anything we can do to make amends, we will do it." Vex-Thar regarded the human male with interest. He carried himself with authority despite his small size and fragile body. This was a leader, someone who understood responsibility. She respected that, even in an alien. "Your female will help return my children to me. In exchange, my pack will not destroy your settlement. We will maintain a presence here until the transition is complete. If your people attempt anything foolish, my warriors will respond with force. Is this acceptable to you, Commander Henderson?" Henderson nodded slowly. It was not really a negotiation so much as a statement of terms, but under the circumstances, he had no room to argue. "That is acceptable. Dr. Blake will have everything she needs to help with the transition. My people will remain peaceful and cooperative." He paused, then added, "Your young are remarkable creatures. I hope they grow strong and healthy." Vex-Thar's eyes narrowed slightly, searching for mockery or deception in the human's words. She found none. This leader meant what he said. Perhaps humans were not entirely worthless after all. Jake Morrison limped into view, one hand pressed against his ribs where the dragon's tail had caught him. He looked at the scene with confusion. "We are not fighting anymore." Commander Henderson shook his head. "No. We are negotiating." Jake looked at the massive dragon, then at Emma sitting calmly with the hatchlings, then back at his commander. "This is the strangest peace treaty I have ever seen." Henderson allowed himself a small smile. "You and me both, Morrison. You and me both." The 3 hatchlings chirped contentedly, unaware that they had just become the center of an unprecedented agreement between species. They only knew that their mother had arrived and they were still with Emma, and that combination made them feel safer than they had ever felt before. The first day of the transition period was tense and awkward. Emma set up a schedule that allowed Vexthar to spend time with her hatchlings in controlled increments. They started with 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, with Emma remaining present throughout. The hatchlings were confused at first, chirping nervously when their mother's massive form filled their living space. But slowly, with patient encouragement from Emma, they began to accept the situation. They would climb onto Vexthar's claws and explore her scales, chirping with delight when she rumbled approval at their antics. Vexthar was surprised by the human female's knowledge. Emma spoke about bonding behaviors and developmental stages with an understanding that rivaled the pack's own nursemaids. She explained how hatchlings needed consistent routines and positive reinforcement, how fear could damage their growth, how patience was more effective than force. The matriarch found herself listening carefully, even taking notes in her own way about techniques that might help with future litters. This human understood young creatures in a way that Vexthar had not expected from a species so different from her own. The other members of the Red Dragon Pack watched from a distance, maintaining a perimeter around the outpost but not interfering. They did not understand their matriarch's decision to work with the humans rather than simply taking the hatchlings by force. Some grumbled about weakness, about showing mercy to thieves. But Vexthar's authority was absolute, earned through centuries of successful leadership. If she believed this strange cooperation was necessary, then they would support her even while harboring doubts. On the third day, Commander Henderson approached Vexthar with a proposal. The outpost had medical technology and nutritional supplements that might benefit the hatchlings. Emma had been using them to ensure optimal health, and Henderson offered to share the data with the dragon matriarch. Vexthar was skeptical at first. Dragon young had been raised without human interference for millions of years. What could these aliens possibly offer? But she agreed to examine the records, more out of curiosity than expectation. What she found shocked her. Emma had been monitoring the hatchlings' calcium levels, their protein intake, their temperature regulation down to the smallest detail. The human had identified a minor deficiency in one hatchling and corrected it before it became serious. The environmental controls in Emma's quarters maintained perfect conditions for dragon development, actually superior to the natural cave environment. The survival rate for these 3 hatchlings, based on the data, was nearly perfect. In the wild, even under ideal conditions, dragon hatchlings had only about a 70% chance of reaching their first year. Emma had improved those odds significantly through careful scientific management. Vexthar found herself in an uncomfortable position. She had come here ready to destroy these humans for stealing her children. Now she was forced to admit that her hatchlings had benefited from the theft in ways she had not anticipated. The realization was humbling and frustrating in equal measure. She sought out Emma later that day, finding the human in the makeshift nursery with all 3 young dragons curled up for their afternoon rest. "Tell me about your species," Vexthar said through the translation device. "Why do you care so much for creatures that are not your own?" Emma looked up from the research notes she was reviewing. "It is complicated. Humans are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We do not have natural weapons or armor. We cannot breathe in vacuum or survive extreme temperatures. What we have instead is adaptability and cooperation. We learned long ago that survival often means working together, not just with our own kind but with other species as well. We domesticated animals on Earth, forming partnerships that made both species more successful. We protected creatures that were weaker than us because diversity makes an ecosystem stronger. We care for orphans and injured animals because it is in our nature to nurture, to preserve life when we can." The concept was alien to Vexthar in more ways than one. Dragons were apex predators, creatures of power and dominance. They protected their own fiercely but saw other species as either prey, threats, or irrelevant. Cooperation outside the pack was rare and usually temporary. The idea of deliberately helping weaker creatures, of expending resources to preserve life that provided no immediate benefit, seemed wasteful. Yet the results were difficult to argue with. The humans had built a civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds despite their physical limitations. They had done so through technology and cooperation, using their minds to compensate for their weak bodies. "Your people survive by being soft," Vexthar observed. Emma smiled at that. "We prefer to think of it as being smart." Fighting is expensive. War destroys resources and kills useful individuals. Cooperation builds wealth and knowledge. Sometimes the best way to win is to turn your enemy into an ally. She paused, then added more quietly, though I understand that philosophy is easier to embrace when you are not the one whose children were taken. I do not blame you for wanting to destroy us. I would feel the same in your position. Vexthar considered this for a long moment. The human's honesty was refreshing. She did not pretend her actions were justified, did not hide behind excuses or false apologies. She admitted her mistake and worked to fix it without demanding forgiveness. That took a kind of courage that Vexthar could respect. Perhaps there was more to humans than she had initially believed. Perhaps they were not just weak prey animals spreading across the galaxy, but something more complex, something that could not be easily categorized or dismissed. Jake Morrison had been watching the interaction between the species with growing fascination. He had spent his career fighting, protecting human settlements from pirates and hostile aliens. He had seen the worst that the galaxy had to offer. But this was different. This was not combat but diplomacy, not destruction but creation. He found himself talking with some of the younger dragons, using the translation device to share stories about human military tactics. The dragons were surprised to learn that humans relied on strategy and teamwork rather than individual strength. One warrior, a dragon called Krell, seemed particularly interested in the concept of defensive formations and coordinated fire. By the end of the first week, something unexpected was happening. The humans and dragons were not just tolerating each other, but actually learning from one another. Lisa Grant worked on improving the translation software, adding vocabulary and context until conversations became almost natural. She spoke with dragon navigators about their methods of space travel, taking notes on techniques that human engineers might adapt. The dragons were equally curious about human technology, particularly the systems that allowed such fragile creatures to survive in environments that would kill them instantly. Commander Henderson met with Vexthar formally on the 8th day to discuss the future. The hatchlings were adjusting well to their mother, spending more time with her and less with Emma each day. Within another week, the transition would be complete and the dragons could leave. But Henderson wanted to propose something more. Your pack came here searching for a safe place to raise your young. We came here searching for resources to support our colony. I believe we can help each other. This world is large enough for both our species. We could establish a formal arrangement, territory divisions, and trade agreements. Vexthar was intrigued despite herself. What could humans possibly offer the Red Dragon Pack? Commander Henderson smiled slightly. Protection, for one thing. Your species is powerful but not numerous. You mentioned being driven from other systems. We humans are good at diplomacy and legal frameworks. We could help establish Scorvia Prime as a protected world, make it officially illegal for other species to hunt here. In exchange, your warriors could help defend our mining operations from pirates. We could share medical technology to help improve your hatchling survival rates. We could provide environmental monitoring to identify the best nesting sites. A formal alliance would benefit both our peoples. The matriarch thought carefully about the proposal. Everything she had learned about humanity over the past week suggested they could be trusted, at least within the bounds of a clear agreement. They were not warriors by nature, which made them less threatening. They valued life and cooperation, which aligned with her own desire to protect her pack. And the practical benefits were undeniable. Dragon numbers had been declining for centuries. Better nutrition and medical care could reverse that trend. Legal protection could give them the safe haven they so desperately needed. But there was one thing Vexthar needed to know before agreeing. She looked directly at Commander Henderson and asked the question that mattered most. If we agree to this alliance, if we share this world with your people, what happens if we fail you? What happens if pirates attack and we cannot stop them? What happens if your people are harmed despite our protection? Will you blame us? Will you seek revenge? The commander met her gaze without flinching. Failure is part of any partnership. If you fight beside us and give your best effort, we will not hold losses against you. What I cannot tolerate is betrayal or abandonment. Stand with us when we need you and we will stand with you. That is all I ask. Vexthar felt something shift inside her chest. This human spoke with the same code of honor that governed dragon packs. Loyalty mattered more than success. Effort mattered more than results. It was a philosophy she understood deeply. Very well, Commander Henderson. The Red Dragon Pack will consider your proposal. I must speak with my warriors and gain their consensus. But I believe we can reach an agreement that serves both our species. Henderson nodded, satisfied. That is all I can ask for. He glanced toward Emma's quarters where the hatchlings could be heard chirping and playing. Your children are remarkable, by the way. They will grow into fine warriors. Vexthar allowed herself a rare smile, her teeth gleaming in the artificial light. They are remarkable because a human cared for them when I could not. That is a debt I will not forget. Emma Blake saved my children when she could have let them die. She returned them to me when she could have fled or hidden them. Whatever else happens between our species, I will always remember that. Commander Henderson felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had come so close to war, to mutual destruction. Instead, they had found something that might become lasting peace. It was not the outcome anyone had expected, but it was better than anything he had dared to hope for when the Dragon Fleet first appeared in orbit. The Red Dragon Pack held their council on the 10th day. Vexthar presented Commander Henderson's proposal to her warriors, laying out the benefits and risks with characteristic bluntness. Some dragons opposed the idea immediately. They had not come all this way to become servants to weak humans. They were predators, not pets. But others saw the wisdom in the arrangement. The pack needed a safe haven and the resources to raise their young properly. Pride was important, but survival was more important. After hours of heated debate, the council reached a consensus. They would accept the human offer and establish a formal alliance. Commander Henderson received the news with relief and immediately began drafting the formal treaty. It was a document unlike any in human history, an agreement between species that had nearly destroyed each other just days before. The treaty divided Scorvia Prime into territories, with the northern polar regions designated as dragon nesting grounds and the southern regions allocated for human mining operations. Trade agreements were established for medical technology, environmental data, and defensive support. Both species agreed to respect each other's customs and to settle disputes through negotiation rather than violence. Emma continued working with the hatchlings through the transition period, though her role was diminishing as they spent more time with their mother. On the 14th day, Vexthar announced that the hatchlings were ready to leave. They had fully bonded with her and showed no more distress at separating from Emma. It was what Emma had worked toward, what she had promised, but she still felt a pang of loss when Vexthar gathered her children and prepared to depart. The hatchlings chirped goodbye to Emma, their golden eyes bright with affection but without the desperate need that had characterized their early days. They had moved on, as children do. But Vexthar surprised everyone with her next announcement. Emma Blake would serve as the official liaison between the human outpost and the Red Dragon Pack. She had proven herself capable of understanding dragon needs and communicating across the species barrier. More importantly, she had proven herself trustworthy. The hatchlings loved her and Vexthar respected her. It was a perfect arrangement. Emma accepted the position with a mixture of pride and trepidation. She had never imagined her career would lead here, to serving as a bridge between humanity and a species of spacefaring dragons. The alliance took shape quickly after that. Dragon warriors began patrolling the mining operations, their presence alone enough to deter most pirates. Human medical teams worked with dragon nursemaids to implement better health monitoring for hatchlings across the pack. Environmental scientists identified 3 additional nesting sites with ideal temperature and humidity conditions. The cooperation was not always smooth. Cultural differences led to misunderstandings and occasionally heated arguments. But both species were committed to making the arrangement work, and that commitment carried them through the difficult early months. Jake Morrison found an unexpected calling as a combat instructor. The dragons were fascinated by human tactical concepts, and Jake was happy to share his knowledge. He worked with Krell and other young warriors to develop coordinated attack patterns that combined dragon strength with human strategy. The results were impressive. In a simulated pirate attack, the mixed team of humans and dragons proved far more effective than either species fighting alone. Jake felt a sense of purpose he had not experienced since joining the colonial forces. He was not just protecting people anymore. He was building something new. Lisa Grant became the expert on dragon communication technology. She spent months refining the translation systems until conversations flowed almost naturally between species. She also established a communication network that allowed dragons in space to coordinate with humans on the ground. The technology she developed would eventually be adopted across human space as more species made contact with dragon packs. Lisa had always dreamed of making an impact on human civilization. She had achieved that and more, becoming instrumental in forging the first major human-dragon alliance. 6 months passed. The outpost expanded from 6 modules to 24, with additional facilities for dragon visitors and joint training centers. The mining operation exceeded all projections, the mineral wealth of Scorvia Prime proving even more valuable than initial surveys suggested. The Red Dragon Pack's numbers began to stabilize as improved medical care and nesting conditions led to higher survival rates for hatchlings. What had started as a near catastrophe had transformed into a thriving partnership that benefited everyone involved. Emma stood on the plateau overlooking the joint settlement that had grown around the original outpost. Humans and dragons moved through the streets together now, working side by side on construction projects and research initiatives. In the distance, she could see the 3 hatchlings that had started everything. They were no longer small enough to fit on her chest. In 6 months they had grown to the size of horses, their scales hardened and their wings strong enough for sustained flight. They spotted Emma watching them and flew over, landing with practiced grace that still made the ground shake slightly. The young dragons chirped greetings, rubbing their heads against Emma's hands like giant cats. They remembered her, even though months had passed since she had been their primary caregiver. Emma scratched their scales affectionately, marveling at how quickly they had grown. Vexthar approached from behind, her massive form casting a shadow over the reunion. The matriarch watched her children interact with the human who had saved them, and Emma thought she saw something like fondness in those ancient golden eyes. "You have taught them well," Emma said, admiring the young dragon's health and confidence. Vexthar rumbled in what might have been amusement. "I taught them to fly and hunt. You taught them to trust. Both lessons are valuable." The matriarch settled onto the ground, folding her wings in a gesture that Emma had learned meant relaxation and contentment. "Tell me, human, do you ever regret taking my children from that cave? Do you wish you had left them there and avoided all this trouble?" Emma considered the question carefully. She thought about the terror of that first encounter, the certainty that she was about to die, the weeks of stress and uncertainty that followed. She thought about all the ways things could have gone wrong, all the lives that could have been lost. But she also thought about what they had built together, the alliance that had grown from mutual fear into genuine cooperation. She looked at the settlement, at the humans and dragons working together, at the 3 young dragons who had been the catalyst for everything. "No," Emma said finally. "I do not regret it. I wish I had known they were not truly abandoned. I wish I had handled it differently. But if I had left them in that cave, we would never have met. We would never have learned about each other. Your pack would still be searching for a safe haven, and we would still be just another human colony struggling alone in the darkness. What we have now is better than what we would have had. Sometimes the best things come from the worst mistakes." Vexthar made a sound deep in her chest that the translation device interpreted as thoughtful agreement. "You are a strange species, humans. You survive not through strength but through your ability to turn enemies into allies. You fight not with claws and fire but with words and cooperation. I did not understand this when I first arrived. I saw only weakness and treachery. But I have learned that your way of survival is as valid as ours. Perhaps more valid, given how far your species has spread across the galaxy." Emma smiled at the compliment, understanding how much it cost the proud matriarch to admit that humans had strengths worth respecting. "Your species is strong, Vexthar, but strength alone is not enough for survival in a galaxy filled with dangers. The strongest warriors can still be overwhelmed by numbers or superior technology. But if you combine your strength with our cooperation, if you blend dragon power with human strategy, then together we become something greater than either species alone. That is the real lesson here. Unity makes us all stronger." The 3 young dragons chirped in agreement, though Emma doubted they fully understood the philosophical discussion happening around them. They just knew that they were happy, that they were safe, that they had both a fierce mother and a gentle friend who cared about them. For them, the alliance between species was simply the natural state of things. They had known nothing else since hatching. Perhaps that was how it should be, Emma thought. Perhaps the next generation would not see the divisions and differences that had nearly led to war. Perhaps they would simply see opportunities for cooperation. Commander Henderson approached the group, followed by Jake Morrison and Lisa Grant. The commander carried a data pad containing reports on the latest mining yields and security assessments. Everything was proceeding smoothly. Better than smoothly, actually. The partnership was exceeding expectations on every metric. Henderson cleared his throat to get Emma and Vexthar's attention. I wanted to inform you both that the Colonial Administration has approved permanent settlement status for Scorvia Prime. We are officially recognized as a joint human-dragon colony. They are sending additional resources and personnel to support the expansion. Vexthar lifted her head, her eyes narrowing. More humans coming here. How many? Commander Henderson consulted his data pad. Approximately 500 over the next year, along with construction materials for 10 new modules. But they have all been briefed on the Alliance and on proper protocols for interacting with your pack. There should be no incidents like the one that started all this. The matriarch considered this for a moment before nodding her acceptance. Very well. The pack will continue honoring our agreement. But I will expect your new arrivals to show proper respect for dragon territory and customs. Of course, Henderson agreed. Emma will conduct orientation sessions for all new personnel. She has developed a comprehensive training program on dragon culture and communication. Jake added that he would be running joint military exercises with dragon warriors to integrate any new security personnel into the existing defense structure. Lisa mentioned upgrades to the translation network that would make communication even easier. Everyone had a role to play in maintaining and strengthening the Alliance. It had become the central focus of life on Scorvia Prime. As the sun set over the volcanic landscape, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that matched dragon scales, Emma felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had come to Scorvia Prime as a xenobiologist hoping to study alien life. Instead, she had become part of something far more significant than research. She had helped forge a bridge between species, turning potential enemies into genuine partners. The 3 young dragons curled up around her feet, their warmth seeping through her boots. Vexthar watched over all of them with protective vigilance. You came here for blood, Emma said quietly to Vexthar. You came prepared to destroy us for taking your children. What stopped you? What made you choose cooperation over vengeance? The matriarch was silent for a long time, her golden eyes reflecting the dying light. I found my hatchlings asleep on your chest, she said finally. They were not afraid. They were not hurt. They were content and healthy and loved. I realized in that moment that you were not an enemy but a confused ally who had made an honest mistake. I chose to see past my rage and recognize the truth of the situation. That choice saved us all. Emma reached out and placed her small hand against Vexthar's massive claw. Thank you for that choice. Thank you for giving us a chance to prove ourselves. The matriarch rumbled softly. Thank you for caring for my children when I could not. Thank you for showing me that humans are more than I believed them to be. The 2 remained there as darkness fell, 2 mothers from different species who had found common ground in the simple act of protecting young life. Around them, the settlement grew quiet as both humans and dragons prepared for sleep. The Red Dragon Pack had come for blood but found something far more valuable. They found a future where their hatchlings could grow strong and safe. They found allies who fought with minds instead of claws but who were no less effective for it. They found that the galaxy was bigger and stranger and more full of possibility than they had imagined. Most importantly, they found that survival did not always mean standing alone. Sometimes it meant reaching across the void between species and building something new together. Emma looked at the 3 young dragons sleeping at her feet, their scales gleaming in the starlight. They were the future, the first generation to grow up knowing both human and dragon cultures as normal parts of life. They would never understand the fear and hatred that nearly destroyed their parents' alliance. They would simply know cooperation and friendship as the natural way of things. Perhaps that was humanity's greatest strength, Emma thought. Not weapons or technology or even intelligence, but the ability to look at something alien and frightening and choose to see a potential friend instead of an inevitable enemy. It was that choice, repeated over and over across countless encounters, that had allowed humanity to spread across the stars. And it was that same choice that had turned the Red Dragon Pack from destroyers into partners, transforming what should have been a massacre into the foundation of something beautiful and lasting.